Hello again. In our previous video, we talked about the absolute value of a real number. In this video, we finish off what we started in the previous video. We did say that the absolute value of a real number is the distance from 0 to that particular real number. And the symbol we introduced is as shown. There are two vertical lines with the number in between. So you have the absolute value of that real number. So this symbol here is the absolute value of a real number x. So for example, if your real number is a number to the right of 0 on the real number line, so maybe if it's a positive number, for example, or if your real number is a negative number, it's a number to the left of 0 on the real number line, the absolute value of that real number is the distance from 0 to that real number if it's a number to the right of 0, and similarly if it's a number to the left of 0, the absolute value of that real number is the distance from 0 to the negative number you're talking about. We also did say that we should note that the absolute value of a real number is always non-negative. What does that mean? That means that the absolute value of a real number can be 0, or it can be greater than 0. Under what conditions do this happen? The absolute value of a real number will be 0 if that number itself is 0. That is, the absolute value of 0 is 0. The absolute value of a real number will be positive. That means it will be greater than 0 if that real number itself is greater than 0, or if it is less than 0. That was the reason why the absolute value of a real number could not be negative. It does not matter what the number is. If you take its absolute value, that is its distance from 0, it will always be non-negative. The next thing to consider now is to talk about the distance between any two real numbers on the real number line. We are going to define these in terms of the absolute value of those real numbers. So, for example, what is the distance between the number -3 and 4 on the real number line? We can count the distance between them, the number of points between them, and if we count, you will see that there are 7 points, 7 units between them. So the distance between -3 and 4 on the real number line is 7. But it is not efficient or practical to do this every time. So we're going to use the absolute value to figure out the distance between those 2 points. It turns out that the absolute value, that the distance between -3 and 4 is the absolute value of -3 minus 4. Or you could say it is the absolute value of 4 minus -3, which you can deal with. You can compute this, right? The absolute value of -3 minus 4 is the same thing as the absolute value of -7, which is equal to 7. So the absolute value of -7 is 7. Or the absolute value of 4 minus -3 is the same thing as the absolute value of 4 plus 3. Why? How does that happen? Well, you can see the negative and the negative, right? If you are multiplying negative by negative, you get a positive. So the absolute value of 4 plus 3 is the absolute value of 7, which is also 7. In general, this implies that when we talk about the absolute value of two real numbers on the real number line, you can define the distance between those 2 points, like A and B in this picture. The distance between A and B is the absolute value of A minus B, or the absolute value of B minus A. The order does not matter, since the absolute value of any real number will always be non-negative. So perhaps you should try an example here. As in previous videos, you may need to pause that video now once you see the question, and you can try your hand on the questions, and afterwards you can see what I have done when you have finished. So go ahead and pause the video now. So what did you do? Here is what I did. For the first one, the distance between -1.5 and -8.25 you can define as the absolute value of -1.5 minus 8.25, and if you compute the numbers, you will find that that will be the absolute value of negative 1.5 plus 8.25, which gives you the absolute value of 6.75, and your result is 6.75. Similarly, for B, the distance between 12 and 2.4 is the absolute value of 12 minus 2.4, which is the same thing as the absolute value of 9.6, and your result is 9.6. And finally, the distance between negative 9.75 and 3 is the absolute value of negative 9.75 minus 3, which is equal to the absolute value of negative 12.75, and your result is 12.75. This concludes our video on the absolute value of real numbers on the real number line.